for most of my adult lifetime. And now it's reaching apex state. You can see it in its most virulent and ugly form with regard to what Israel is doing currently in Gaza. Just to make clear right now, Israel is shipping in extraordinary amounts of aid to Gaza. Extraordinary amounts of aid. Ambassador Mike Huckabee put out a tweet this morning explaining exactly what is happening in Gaza. Quote, there is no policy of starvation in Gaza except Hamas's deliberate starvation of the hostages. Israel does not limit the amount of aid entering Gaza and has in the past facilitated the entry of up to 700 aid trucks per day, depending on UN and NGO supply. In addition, Israel is now facilitating daily humanitarian pauses, 10 a.m. to 8 p.m., and aid airdrops. UN-led aid distribution has stagnated after an initial increase, and the vast majority of it is diverted by Hamas. We talked last week about how the UN is openly saying they will not allow the IDF to help them get the aid into the Gaza Strip because they want it stolen by Hamas. It is a thing they desire. A growing number of aid partners are trying alternative methods of aid distribution to civilians instead of relying solely on the UN mechanism. The main obstacle is not aid entry, says Huckabee, but distribution within Gaza. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is the only mechanism successfully ensuring aid is not diverted by Hamas. So how much aid went into Gaza over the last week? 23,000 tons of aid. 23,000 tons of aid. Now, a rough estimate for how much aid it would require to feed 2 million people in Gaza every day is about 1,200 tons of aid, 1,300 tons of aid. So what that means is that they shipped in the last week more than double, almost triple the amount of aid that would be necessary to support the entirety of the Gaza Strip every day. Where did it all go? Hamas was stealing an enormous amount of it. 1,200 trucks entered Gaza over the past week, and Israel has been holding off on military action day to day in order to facilitate the entry of that aid. It is pretty clear what is happening here, which is that Gaza is not in a state of overt famine, except that Hamas keeps stealing the aid. And whatever famine is being caused in Gaza is being caused by Hamas. Hamas is not trying to bring aid into the people. Hamas is desperately attempting to avoid that. They're shooting people who show up in lines for the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. They shoot rockets at the aid stations that Gaza Humanitarian Foundation has set up. Here, for example, is a Gazan telling MSNBC the dirty part, which is that Hamas actually would like a famine.
Hamas wanted to see the deterioration of the humanitarian conditions in Gaza, knowing full well that this may be the only hope for drawing in the international community, for producing horrendous imagery that showcase the war as being a humanitarian catastrophe, and therefore hoping to bring about a rapid end to the war that it started and it has an ultimate responsibility to end. I think for sure Hamas has had a role in siphoning off plenty of the aid going in.
Look, obviously, as a father, as a human being, when I look at pictures of anybody suffering, particularly children, you have to be very concerned and upset about that. It is very upsetting. I don't know how a human being can look at pictures in Gaza and not be upset by those pictures. The question is, who is to blame for that suffering, and how does that suffering stop? And the answer to the former question is Hamas. And the answer to the latter is that Hamas is no longer in control of either aid distribution or of the Gaza Strip in part or in whole. Obviously, also, if the Europeans continue to support Hamas and do Hamas's work in terms of propaganda to ensure that Hamas never gives up, the suffering only continues, which is Hamas's game. That is the entire game here. By the way, we know for a fact why Hamas is doing this, because Hamas is winning what it believes to be political victories precisely by starving the people of Gaza. It is a thing that they want to do. They literally came out yesterday and said they will not disarm until a Palestinian state is established with Jerusalem as its capital. Now, they as a fighting force have been decimated by Israel. They've been wrecked by Israel, clearly. And yet they believe they have the upper hand in negotiations. Why? Because they have pushed this propagandistic effort to label Israel as a genocidal nation. And somehow, post-October 7th, after the deadliest attack on Jews since World War II, they are now on the verge of having a bunch of countries declare a Palestinian state with no government, no territory, no borders, and no freedom. I mean, that's an amazing PR victory by them, reliant on the stupidity and gullibility of a bunch of people who are willing to do Hamas's propaganda work for them. You know who's saying this? Hamas. Here, for example, is Hamas official Ghazi Hamad saying October 7th actually achieved what they wanted. Now, we should know, by the way, that there was a ceasefire that had been brokered by the end of July. Steve Witkoff was due to fly to Doha for the signing on July 23rd, according to the Jewish Chronicle. And you know what happened? Hamas ran an op. They ran an op saying that Israel was engaged in mass starvation. A bunch of European countries came out and said they were going to give the Palestinians a state on the basis of that. And then Hamas pulled out of the talks. And so the end of the war was actually prevented by Hamas along with its European allies, which is what they are. And it's, at best, delightful stooges in the media. Here's Hamas official Ghazi Hamad saying, we played them like a fish.
7 أكتوبر هذه الضربة القوية التي وجهت إلى إسرائيل.
He's saying the powerful blow that was delivered to Israel on October 7th has yielded 3 very important historic achievements. First of all, it brought the Palestinian cause back to center stage. Why are all these countries recognizing Palestine now? Had any country dared to recognize the state of Palestine prior to October 7th? The overall outcome of October 7th forced the world to open its eyes to the Palestinian cause and to act forcefully in this respect. So, they killed their own citizens, 1,200 Israelis, took 250 prisoners, 20 are still alive, probably in tunnels under Gaza, being starved, as we'll talk about in a moment. They did this, and they achieved what they wanted to achieve because they knew that the left would go for it. They knew the media would fall for it, and they'd be able to dredge up extraordinary amounts of ire against Israel online. They knew this. It's why they've strengthened their bargaining position. If they cared about the people of Gaza, they would not be strengthening their bargaining position. They'd be looking to end the war. And you know who's helping them out? All of their friends in the media. All their friends in the media. Look at the difference in coverage between a photo of a young child in Gaza with cerebral palsy who was blasted out all over the world. We talked about this last week. There's a picture on the front page of the New York Times of a kid named Yusuf Matar, a kid with cerebral palsy. Okay, and the New York Times put it on the front page because the kid looked like in horrible physical condition because of the cerebral palsy. He has a younger brother who's standing just off camera who looks totally fine. The New York Times did not run the picture with the younger brother. They ran the picture with the kid with cerebral palsy. Why did they run it? Well, now we know the details. According to Semaphore, last Thursday at 3 p.m., the Times was preparing to run images of Yusuf Matar, a young child in Gaza with cerebral palsy, who is suffering from lack of nourishment, alongside its July 24th story that cited doctors in Gaza finding, quote, an increasing number of their patients are suffering and dying from starvation. And by the way, if you think that there is a chance in hell that if Hamas, for example, and all of the Palestinian propaganda outlets had pictures of hundreds of starving Palestinians, like in skeletal condition, and they weren't running on the front pages, you'd be out of your mind. Of course they would be, and you know they would be, because the Palestinian propaganda effort is overwhelming, and the media have bought into it because it matches all of their priors. So what happened with this kid? The Times' topmost editors wanted to err on the side of caution. After viewing the photo, according to communications viewed by Semaphore, they worried it might inadvertently call into question the paper's reporting, which said many of the children suffering from hunger did not have pre-existing health issues. Managing editor Mark Lacey said, quote, do we want to use a photo that will be the subject of debate when there's presumably no shortage of images of children who were not malnourished before the war and currently are? Executive editor Joe Kahn agreed. The story isn't framed around people with special needs, and the lead art really should not do that either. They landed instead on a photo of Mohammed Zakaria al-Mutawak, an 18-month-old child in Gaza suffering from malnutrition. And they thought that that photo was going to actually do it better. The problem is that actually al-Mutawak also had genetic and other disorders. So they ran that as well. They ran another photo of a kid who had significant health disorders prior to the situation in Gaza. They were desperate to run a photo demonstrating that Israel was starving children, and so they went ahead with photos of kids who had serious other health conditions other than lack of nutrition. I mean, Hamas could always count on its friends in the media. They could always count on their friends in the media. In fact, Hamas can count on its friends in the media so much that last week, very end of last week, Hamas released a video of a hostage that it took during October 7th. His name is Aviatar David. Okay, they released this video, photos of him looking like a prisoner at Auschwitz. Okay, that's what he looks like. For those who can't see, he's skeletal, totally starved. If you look at a before and after picture of this guy, he looks totally different. And they forced him to dig his own grave in a tunnel. And then they released the pictures as a way to try and create pressure inside Israel for Israel to essentially end the war without victory. They released those pictures publicly. And in fact, in the video, they actually have a person from Hamas handing him food. And they make the claim that Hamas is living in the same conditions as Aviatar David. There's only one problem. You can see the arm of the person from Hamas, and it is a totally normal, not malnourished arm. Here's the video. He says, what I'm doing now is digging in my own grave. I'm walking directly to my grave. This is the grave where I think I'm going to be buried. Time is running out. You are the only ones who can end this. To be released and to be able to sleep in my bed with my family. Okay, they released this. Hamas released this. Why did they release this? Because they knew that the media would not pick up on it and run with it. The New York Times did not dedicate a front page to that picture of Aviatar David, who, by the way, is, as far as I have seen, maybe the only picture of a adult victim of starvation in the Gaza Strip. Again, you would imagine lots of pictures of adult victims of starvation in the Gaza Strip if Hamas had those to publicize, except that Israel and the GHF have been handing out thousands of meals, millions of meals over the course of the last couple of months in the Gaza Strip. Okay, so did this run on the front page of the New York Times? Of course not. They ran instead the picture of the Palestinian mom holding the kid with cerebral palsy. That is what they did. And again, they know that their friends in the media will do whatever they can to foster the idea that this is once again a cycle of violence and Israel basically should surrender. Now, I do find it amusing that all of these people keep saying, well, Hamas should just give up the hostages and end the war. Okay, how do you propose to do this? How do you propose to accomplish this? Do you really think that Hamas is going to stop now? They believe they have the upper hand in terms of the politics of the situation. The minute they give up all the hostages, they're dead, and they know it. I mean, what do you think is going to happen here? And I think in order to truly understand what Aviatar David, how starved Aviatar David is, here's a picture of Aviatar David before. Okay, here's a picture of Aviatar David after. Okay, that is a victim of starvation because Hamas is deliberately starving its own hostages. Okay, but then you have tweets like this one from Piers Morgan, who has truly turned into the Jerry Springer of low-rent politics. Quote, it's interesting that all the prominent pro-Israeli voices on here who refuse to believe any Gazan casualty numbers published by the Hamas-run Palestinian Health Ministry accept the veracity of hostage pics or videos posted by Hamas without hesitation. I don't know what the hell Piers is trying to say here. Honestly, is he claiming that the pictures put out by Hamas are fake there? Hamas put them out. And if he's saying, why do you only believe the Hamas propaganda videos in which they accidentally expose themselves as opposed to the numbers that they put out that are totally unverified and unverifiable? The answer is very simple. It's an obvious admission against interest. Okay, there's a principle in criminal law. Okay, that principle is that if somebody makes what's called an admission against interest, it is admissible in court in a way that admissions against interest are not. In other words, people don't tend to tell on themselves. So if Hamas is putting out one line of attack saying that Israel is killing hundreds of people at aid stations every day, that serves their purposes. And if they put out a video that is designed to stoke hatred in Israel by people against their government, which is what this was, and it accidentally instead shows that they are starving hostages, that is an accidental admission against interest. So yes, I believe them when they put out a video of the hostage whose name we know, of them starving this person to death. Yes, I believe them when they do that. And no, I don't believe them when they put out statistics that there's no way of verifying 5 minutes after an event occurs when we know they lie repeatedly. But again, all this is part of a broader propagandistic idea, and it is bought into by the left across the globe. I mean, truly across the globe, which is an amazing thing and speaks to sort of the underlying dynamic on the left, which is always and forever to declare that unsuccessful third world regimes like Hamas are somehow victimized by their colonial overlords or some such nonsense.